I've been asked to talk about risk and the financial and investment risks that might play out after COP26. So let's start with the official. That's the official website of COP to see how they thought it went. And not a very ambitious statement, but it basically says Paris is not dead. Whether the patient is fit to get up and run a sprint or a marathon, that's a different matter, but at least the patient is not dead. And so there is hope that they may able to get up and run and go to the finish line. So given that the backdrop, the political backdrop, the geopolitical backdrop is not very strong right now, I think it is a positive thing from a risk point of view. And corresponding to the emissions pathways, we have a required investment pathway. Because what happens there is the evolution of technology and changes in regulations bring forward into the near term what would have been longer term risks. So you could have a sudden impairment on your assets if it turns out that new regulations have deemed that the heating system in your building is no longer legal or will be phased out. So those would be specific events that could devalue, derate, impair your assets. And I found it interesting that when they announced it, on the official UN website, it says not blah, blah, blah. So as I was thinking of these slides yesterday, this SMS arrived. You then click on the link, you go to the website. City Gas has rebranded itself as City Energy. From a risk communication point of view, the way they connect to the holistic Singapore plan, the national plan, they connect to their 160-year history. So using a sense of national identity, history, and beliefs to then project into the future some of the changes that are obviously required. Just a couple of weeks ago, India was expecting one of its largest foreign direct investments, and that has now been called off because the recipient of that money has changed its mind as to where they're going to go with their oil and chemicals business. So killed by COP. And how risky is it to rely on green technology, future green technology? If past performance is any guide, it's not that risky. Tech innovation has been amazing. In just the last 10 years, the cost of battery packs, the cost of solar panels have come down dramatically. That's my car in London, the red one. It's a Nissan Leaf. I bought that in late 2016. And my local charging station is 100% sourced from wind and solar. So the UK has done, I think, a pretty good job of systems-wide change. They now have certain days where 50 to 60% of their entire electricity consumption comes from wind and solar. Typically, power, transport, and building constructions are the three main emitters, so that's where the money is required. The role of the public funds is to crowd in private money. So if you look at what the EIB, the European Investment Bank, did, private flow of funds is a little complicated because you have this whole chain, asset owners giving the funds to asset managers and then giving them certain parameters within which to invest. The asset managers then, through the funds, put the money into investee companies. And the companies are the emitters. So when we talk about systems-wide change, who should instigate it? If everyone waits for the other person in that scheme, then you don't get progress. And a lot of that instigating leadership has been coming from the asset owners recently. There's a lot of focus on the board members of many of these companies. When you have assets under management as an investor, you basically also have emissions under management. So what are they waiting for? Why is it not happening straight away? Again, systems change requires a few turns of the flywheel. But I think there is evidence that the various moving parts are moving in the right direction. The pension funds are in turn putting pressure on the likes of Barclays Bank to come up with their transition plan. You have big investors in the US writing to the regulators to say, hey, give us regulations, because otherwise climate risk is a systemic risk in the country. And you had, here in Singapore, DBS, UOB, and OCBC say that we're no longer going to finance coal-powered power plants. This year, we had the ExxonMobil board you would have seen this in the press, lose 2 seats to activists. In the UK, we had, on the 3rd of November, so exactly a month ago, the government came up with a requirement for UK financial institutions and listed companies to publish transition plans. So you can't just make a pledge, you've got to be detailed on exactly how you're going to do that. And then more and more regulators, this snapshot is from the Canadian regulators, they're talking about how climate change can be a systemic risk. And maybe just a moment on why it could be a systemic risk in the financial sector. So let's say you're a bank, and I'm a bank, and you have given out loans to a variety of companies. I've given out loans to a variety of companies. The people I've lent money to, they might be sitting on assets that are now stranded. And because there isn't full transparency right now, I just don't know what you have on your balance sheet, and you don't know what's on my balance sheet, so we stop lending and interacting with each other, and that is how systemic risk flares up. This is not to say that the entire ecosystem has now agreed on a settled place. So a very dramatically strong view that offsetting is not really climate action, but clearly if you're IKEA and Nestle, you're pioneers compared to your peers, you want to be congratulated for that. So there is still tension in the ecosystem, but I still think the direction of travel is going the right way. And I think all of us, actors and players in the system, need to ask, every time we do something or pledge something or announce something or report something, is this adding to the reservoir of trust or is it diminishing it? And here you have this issue of what's called greenwashing. You've taken an action which is green and climate mitigating, but you're either overstating what it is that you're doing or you're distracting from other things that you're doing. And when that happens, that can erode trust. It takes away from the good work that is being done by the good guys, if you like. And there are ways to make sure that if you want to stand out and if you want to signal credibly that I'm not greenwashing, that you do at least 5 things. Because it's not very hard to get qualified as a green investment product under those rules. They're not stringent enough to discriminate out the ones who are not really doing all that effort. So there is a debate now whether they should have a red taxonomy. And it's similar to food labels over here. So in the same way that food labeling has nutritional information, ESG standards will have nutritional information about the positive impact that you're making. But what people are now saying is maybe we should also have allergy information. You need to tell us if there's peanuts or lactose or gluten in these products. And by the way, you should also tell us what harm you're doing, because there must be some harm that you're doing somewhere. So be open about that. That's the red taxonomy. It's like saying that I know the salmon has omega-3, but you should also tell me how much mercury is in there. And that would be a more complete way of doing it. Again, the analogy with the health labeling world is that the symbol is just a first pass. We should not just think of that as, healthier choice is not the same as healthy choice, or reduced fat is not the same as low in fat. The argument now is, who needs to go first? What's the sequencing? You say you first, I say no, you first. So there's a coordination challenge, it's an execution challenge, and then when we report back to each other, there's a transparency challenge. So the core issue is, how do we get trust to not be eroded, even while we have to have information shortcuts? That's what labels are, that's what ratings and scoring, these are information shortcuts, and we need them, but how do we do that without taking away from the trust? And there are 2 ways, at least 2 ways of doing that. One is enhanced reporting standards and disclosing standards and regulations that make them mandatory. And then secondly, skills and training. The financial services industry is going through a tremendous amount of retraining to make sure that people are better consumers of that information as well. There's better training on the statistical aspects. The debate on nuclear energy is a fascinating one, partly because some of the statistical inferences may not be right. And that's why I think initiatives like these, the Institute of the Public Understanding of Risk, they are absolutely important as a risk mitigant of the risk landscape that we now see for COP26. Thank you very much.